I know you talked about wanting to play a little bit more neutral focused, right, and a little more footsies focused.
Yeah, that's what I wanted
So
to improve on my
okay,
footsies game
Mhm.
because I feel like that doesn't exist.
Okay. So what I think we want to try to do is we want to try to build a bit more of a neutral game plan, right? So let me check time. Okay.
All right.
So I'm gonna head into the lab and we'll spend a few minutes talking about what I think you should be trying to do in neutral. All right, so building a neutral game plan, right? This is kind of this is gonna be tougher, I think, to go over like on the fly. I wasn't really prepared, but we'll talk about it, right? So
All
for
right.
Cammy, right, I think the buttons you're missing is this, right? Crouching medium
Yeah,
punch
crouching medium
and
punch. I'm
stand
missing
light
that
kick,
button
right?
and standing leg kick.
Okay. So what I want you to try to consider doing more often is trying to land this button at max
Standing heavy
range.
kick.
Yeah, stand heavy kick at max range, right? So you can see where I'm
Okay.
standing here, right? And
Yeah.
it's landing at the tip of like Cammy's boot, more or less, right? My whiff there, but yeah. So that's the kind of range that I think you want to be standing at and pressing that button, right? And the reason for this is because, like, one, this button is really good, right? It comes, I know it's 10 frames, but the range is long. It's -3 on block, right? So it's very difficult for Ken to punish you here, right? So you do this, right? And you block, and then it's unlikely that Ken will land anything to actually do anything to you, right? Yeah, -3 totally
Okay.
safe, right? Similarly, if you're there a little bit closer, right, you can press this one, right? Stand medium
And a
kick.
medium kick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, neither of these are cancelable, right? So you have to be careful about people doing DI to you, but it allows you to control the space in front of you, right? So what you're trying to do, and we'll hop into the training room actually, and this might help you a little bit here. What we want to try to do is we want
Okay.
to try to establish a spacing that allows you to press this button and this button, right? Yep. Right.
Well, that's forward heavy kick.
Yep. So we
But
want to use the stand medium kick, right? Right, and we want to use the stand heavy kick, right? And the reason we're doing this in this manner is because what you're doing is you're establishing space that you control, right? So like if I walk into this and you hit me with a stand medium kick, right now I'm like, oh crap, I can't walk in there, she's gonna hit me, right?
Okay.
Right. So that's what you're trying to do is that as someone walks into your range, this is the basics, right? So as someone's like when you consider like what's happening, right, in neutral, both players are trying to get into each other's space to press a button, right? I'm trying to like I want to hit you with my stand heavy kick, right? How do I do that? I walk into the range and then I press the button, right? That's step one, right? Of like how do I get hit, right? So obviously people don't like that, right? So as I'm walking up to hit you, right, you press the slightly faster button, the stand medium kick, to stop me, right? So if I'm trying to do this to you, right, I need to walk in, right? So you can either press
Yeah.
your stand heavy kick to stop me from doing that, or stuff it with your stand medium kick, right? Like something like that, right? Because it's faster. So if I do that, right? Oops, sorry. If I do this, it's slower than your stand medium kick, right? So I walk into range and press the button, right? And you'd be able to stuff it, right? Potentially, like that, just right there,
Yeah.
right? Like just like that, right? So that's like the basics, if you will, right? So that's what's called a walking. I forget the actual term for walking into range, but the attack that you're doing to stop me from walking range is called a cover attack, right? So it's like a footsie's trilemma thing, right?
Okay. Cover attack.
Cover attack, right? So you're stopping me from walking into your range, right? That's what that's supposed to be. I forget the actual term for the walk up and hit button. I forget what it is. It's like a Japanese term, but the first one is walk up and press this, right? All right. So now what's going to happen here is one of two things, right? Now that you've established that you're able to press these two buttons to stop me from getting into range, right? Either the opponent will now stop pressing, right? So you're dancing into range, and the opponent is now like you're just doing this to you, right? To me, right? Like you're pressing a button to stop me from walking in. Now, what the opponent can do, or what you as the player can do, is now you can try to bait them into pressing that button, right? So you walk in and out of range, they press it, and then you land your punish, right? The whiff punish, right?
Oh. Okay.
Like that, right?
Okay.
So this is like the basics of what neutral is going to look like for you, I think, right?
All right.
You're trying to establish which of these roles, if you will, that you're playing, right? You're either trying to walk into range to hit them, you're trying to stop them from walking into range so that they don't hit you, or you're baiting them into pressing a button so that you can whiff punish that, right? So that's the trilemma, if you will, the footsie's trilemma. So
Okay.
that's what the basics of neutral, or at least footsies, if you will, is supposed to be. Now, when you start adding stuff like this, right? Like the hooligan, right?
Yeah.
Right? So when you start adding stuff like that, what's happening here is you're kind of bypassing that portion of like walking up and pressing a button and forcing the opponent to react to it, right?
Okay.
Now, what can happen is it can be really effective, right? You were doing this to me, right? You were doing the hooligan, right? And you were able to hit me, right, with that. And that can work pretty well, right? Like, I'm not really ready to defend that. But if I take the hooligan away, right, and you're able to react to it every time, and if I take away, like, dive kicks, right, spin knuckle, right, like, you're able to check all those things, then how else are you supposed to get in now, right? You can continue doing these things, right? And you saw what happened, right? Is that, like, you continue doing these things, and then sometimes it worked, sometimes it wouldn't. But when it didn't work, and I blocked, right, or I checked it, you were kind of stuck on what you're supposed to do next, right?
Wild to think that I made it this far, like almost never using this button.
Yeah. So, and I think it's credit to your your ability to play the game, right? You're able to take the kind of volatile play style that you have and make it work for you, right? And that's something I don't necessarily want to take away from you, because I think that's a strength of yours, right? Is that you're able to tax your opponent's mental stack, right? Force them into situations where they have to react to stuff. But what I want you to get to is that once that stuff stops working out the gate, you want to be able to fall back on something like this, where it allows you to land these buttons, right? And you lowering your risk when you do this stuff, right? Because they're not. If I do this and you check it, right? You get a counter hit off that and potentially a big return, right? So really, if I dive kick and I whiff, right, or you check the hooligan, right? Like, if you did that, you could go to level 3 and really punish me for that, right? So what you're trying to do is you're lowering your risk in neutral, so that you don't get punished as hard when you go for those big moves, right? Because when you go for the big moves, if you're wrong, you're gonna take a lot of damage, right? But for these lower risk stuff, if you're wrong and you miss, right? So that's basically what we're trying to get to, right? Is being able to press those buttons in neutral more often, right? Control the space in front of you, right? That's kind of how Kami works, right? So
Okay.
And what'll eventually happen, hopefully, is that once you're controlling the space like this, you'll be able to get someone to walk back and land the crouching medium kick drive rush, right? So you'll be able to land this thing, right? Eventually, right? And that's kind of what you want to be doing, is like using your neutral buttons to force a situation where you can land a crouching medium kick, right? Because that's Kami. This is what Kami's bread and butter is, right? This.
Yeah.
Right? You want to be able to land this, or whatever the combo ends up being, right? So if you're controlling space, right? Sorry, that was just that was muscle memory. If you're controlling space in front of you, right? What ends up happening is when you walk into someone's range, they'll back up, right? So, I know I may not be doing the best job at explaining that, but that's kind of what we're getting at, is that you want to be controlling space so that when the opponent ends up getting into a situation where they're uncomfortable, you can tag them with this, right? You can tag them with that, right? So,
Okay.
is that kind of making sense? So, like, your neutral game plan should be not to use hooligan and spin knuckles so much, right? And try using this button and this button more neutral to kind of poke, right? And then the idea is that you want to pay attention to what the opponent is doing when you press those buttons, right? So, like, if I walk up and press this, right, to somebody, I want to see how they react to that, right? Do they block? Do they walk forward? Do they try to stuff with a button? Am I counter hitting them? Are they DIing, right? Like those types of things.
So it sounds like kind of like forcing them to play neutral until they don't want to play neutral anymore.
Exactly, right? Because what was happening when we were playing is that you were trying to force a situation where you don't have to play this neutral game. You're trying to, get into plus range, right? Like, when I do that, that's +3. You get in, right, and you get to start your pressure. But when you take that away from somebody that only relies on that, then they're stuck with having to only use those tools and they're being checked. Either they have to stop doing that or they die, right? Like, you eventually run out of health as you're trying to do these things, right? And the reason I bring it up like this, right, and try to get you to play more of this, is because it makes this way more effective, right? If I'm playing, like when you play me, right, and you look at what I'm doing to you, right, I'm not jumping or dragon lashing or doing anything else. I'm just kind of doing this, right? I'm waiting for you to press a button, or waiting for you back here to press a button or something like that, and then reacting to that. Or I'm taking advantage of your passiveness, right? Right? Walk up and stuff what you're doing, right? Right? Something like that, right? So, once that's established, right, then I can start doing stuff like jumping and dragon lashing because my opponent's mental stack is now focused on trying to keep the ground game from, getting started, right? So like the volatility that you're introducing with some of the other parts of your game become better if you have a solid neutral game behind it, right?
Okay.
That makes sense. It's kind of like in football, right? Like I don't know how much American football you watch, but like if you establish the run game, you establish your run game, like your ground game, it makes the passing game easier because you can do things like play actions, right? You're establishing a part of your game that now the opponent has to deal with, and when you do something else, it can be very difficult, right? So that's why when you see higher level players, right, they're doing this stuff and all that, and that's why jumps work, right? Is because we're playing this neutral game, and then all of a sudden I jump something I haven't done in a while, and you may not be ready for it, or you are and you DP me, right? Oops. And it's whatever.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean though, right? Is that the neutral game is from there. So the idea I think for you is to try not to do too many hooligans and spin knuckles, right? Like do them less. Still do them. Don't stop doing them if they're working, right? But what you want to try to do is land more of these buttons in neutral, right? Once you establish that space and the opponent starts to be a little more passive, then you can try to land this, right? You can try to land the crouching medium kick, right? As they're backing up or as they're moving forward, right? So I think that's probably the first step, if you will, on that for a better building a neutral game around that. And I think that's kind of where you wanted a little bit more help with, right? I mean, there's some other things we could talk about, but I think this is the main thing you wanted to try to get through.
Just realized, wait a second, maybe I'm using the wrong terminology. Maybe it's footsies what I'm trying to learn.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it boils down to, right? Is that I've talked about it before. Like footsies is a response to your neutral skip tools being checked and stopped, right? Like if you're able to do this over and over and over again, and the opponent can't stop you from doing this over and over again, keep doing it, right? Like don't stop doing something that's working just because it's quote unquote incorrect. But when the opponent is able to check this stuff, right, that's when you have to start reducing your overall risk, right? Because now every jump represents 1,000 damage, if not more, right? Like every time you jump, you're getting a hit, right? Right, like huge damage here, right? Big damage. So, I think that's really what I would say to start with. And we could play a couple of games here to see if that really helps. I'll play Cammy, and we could just play a little bit, try to play around neutral.
Okay.
Don't worry too much about setups and stuff. We can talk about another time. But I think if this is where you want to improve and where you're looking for help with, I think this is what the right steps to take. Right, reduce your overall risk in neutral. To use less of the neutral skip tools and try to use more of Cammy's outstanding buttons, right?
Alright.
The last thing I'll mention is that you really have to be careful, though. Eventually, people will start DIing you if you use these too much, right? So if you start seeing the DI response, that's when you can start reacting and changing your pattern to doing crouching medium kick, right? Right? So... Right, so... Sorry, that was just muscle memory. Oh, but you know what I mean?
All good.
Is we want to force the opponent to start respecting your ground game, right? And once that happens, then it's so much easier to do the other stuff, right? Your hooligans will be you'll find that you'll land hooligan way more often, right? You'll find that you land like dive kicks and stuff more often, right? So
okay.
Street Fighter 6.